Child abuse and neglect. Historically, children were treated as property. In ancient Rome, children's lives were in the hands of their fathers. If they weren't born the right gender, the father could decide if they lived or died. To mold the children, harsh discipline was used. There wasn't any protection for the children, so they suffered severe punishment, injury, and abuse. In England, the children were like slaves being forced to work 16 hours a day. Sometimes the children had to wear shackles. Often they were whipped and struck with prods. In the late 1800s through the early 1900s, Canada received 8,000 children from overseas to become slaves. These children were forced to work in the factories and on the farms. They received beatings and were quite humiliated. In 1873, Etta Wheeler made a difference. Etta worked for the church. While on a home visit, she saw an 11-year-old girl shackled to a bedpost that had been severely beaten. When Etta went to the authorities, she found out there were no laws to protect the children from abuse. She didn't stop there. She went to the ASPCA and demanded their help. The little girl had to be declared as a member of the animal kingdom, and the ASPCA removed her from the home and placed her in foster care. The little girl, named Mary Ellen, is considered the first case of child abuse, which led to the creation of our child abuse laws. According to the Child Welfare Information Gateway, the definition of child abuse and neglect is any recent act or failure to act on the part of a parent or caretaker which results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse or exploitation, or an act or failure to act which presents an imminent risk of serious harm. The previous definition, which serves as a guide, was incorporated into the federal and state laws. It includes the minimum standards for child abuse and neglect. This came from the Federal Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, which is referred to as CAPTA. Children can die from neglect. Children under 6 years account for 86% of all maltreatment deaths. Infants account for 43% of those deaths. Here are a few facts. Mothers are often at fault in the neglect cases. Fatal abuse is interrelated with poverty, domestic violence, and substance abuse. The majority of child victims and their perpetrators had no prior contact with Child Protective Services, but many of the children had previous injuries that had not been reported. What is child abuse and neglect? Child abuse does not have to be just physical. It can be emotional, psychological, and sexual. Physical abuse is physical injury that is not accidental. This can range from bruises to fractures and even death as a result of punching, beating, kicking, biting, shaking, throwing, stabbing, choking, hitting, burning, or otherwise harming a child, intentionally or unintentionally, by a caregiver. Spanking is not considered abuse as long as it is reasonable and causes no bodily injury to the child. Neglect is the failure of a parent or a guardian or other caregiver to provide for a child's basic needs. Neglect may be physical, such as failure to provide necessary food or shelter, or lack of appropriate supervision. Medical, for example, the failure to provide necessary medical or mental health treatment. Educational, such as the failure to educate a child or to attend to their special education needs. Emotional, as in not paying attention to a child's emotional needs or failure to provide psychological care, or permitting the child to use alcohol or other drugs. Sometimes cultural values, the standards of care in the community, and poverty may contribute to the maltreatment, indicating the family is in need of information or assistance. When a family fails to use information and resources and the child's health or safety is at risk, then child welfare intervention may be required. Sexual abuse is defined by CAPTA as employment, use, persuasion, inducement, enticement, or forcing of a child to engage in or assist any other person to engage in any sexually explicit conduct or simulation of such conduct for the purpose of producing a visual depiction of such conduct, or the rape, and in cases of caretaker or interfamilial family relationships, statutory rape, molestation, prostitution, or other form of sexual exploitation of children, or incest with children. Emotional abuse or psychological abuse is a pattern of behavior that impairs a child's emotional development or sense of self-worth. This may include constant criticism, threats, or rejection, as well as withholding love, support, or guidance. Emotional abuse is often difficult to prove, and therefore, Child Protective Services may not be able to intervene without evidence of harm. The CAPTA amendments of 1996 added abandonment as a form of neglect. In general, a child is considered to be abandoned when the parent's identity or whereabouts are unknown. The child's been left alone in circumstances where the child suffers serious harm, or the parent has failed to maintain contact with the child or provide reasonable support for a specified period of time. Some states have enacted laws, called safe haven laws, that provide safe places for parents to relinquish newborn infants. Substance abuse is an element of the definition of child abuse or neglect in many states. Circumstances that are considered abuse or neglect in some states include the following: prenatal exposure of a child to harm due to the mother's use of an illegal drug or other substance, manufacture of methamphetamines in the presence of a child, selling, distributing, or giving illegal drugs or alcohol to a child, use of a controlled substance by a caregiver that impairs the caregiver's ability to adequately care for the child. Child abuse and neglect have been lifelong implications for victims, including their well-being. While the physical wounds heal, there are several long-term consequences of experiencing the trauma of abuse or neglect. A child or youth's ability to cope and even thrive after trauma is called resilience. And with help, many of these children can work through and overcome their past experiences. Children who are maltreated often are at the risk of experiencing cognitive delays and emotional difficulties, among other issues. Childhood trauma also negatively affects the nervous system and immune system development, putting children who have been maltreated at a higher risk for health problems as adults. These innocent children need to be protected in our society. Laws need to reflect the correct punishment for the crime committed. Too often there is too much leniency in the punishment served. The children, if they survive the abuse and in the neglect, often live with their scars, physical as well as emotional, that can't be fixed. Sometimes the abuse is so severe that the victim faces a life of imprisonment in their own homes, fearing others, fearing relationships, living with health issues, disfigurements, or severe depression. Some become loners that are afraid of their own shadow. If they manage to have a relationship and family, the previous abuse affects their marriage, their love life, or the lives of the children they bring into the world. I do not agree with the DDHS mission of keeping families together. I believe the caregiver should be held as guilty until proven innocent to protect the children. Society needs to stick together and be their voice and provide the protection they need. Statistics for child abuse and neglect are too high. 1 in 4 children are living with neglect or suffering abuse. These statistics do not include the unreported cases. Our laws need to be stricter to protect them. The offender needs to be punished severely because these little ones are the future. Happy Easter.